Okay, welcome back. 1st of January, 1854. And, yeah, it looks like peace has broken out. I passed turn, instantly thought, some AG-odd bug, I'm going to have to figure out how to roll back. I've never done that before, but there is a facility, there's a kind of backup file, which I have seen. And yeah, thought, what's going on here? I got a notification during the past turn of one engagement. That Rita Pasha, that's a defeat, but that's fine. He was set to kind of basically break contact, and we were really looking, we were looking to really just salvage his force, and I was satisfied that had been the case. His force hadn't been destroyed. This report didn't suggest that there were thousands of prisoners or anything like this. We even actually managed to destroy one of their horse artillery regiments in what was presumably a kind of artillery duel. But yeah, he broke off, he sustained losses, he somehow made it to Sofia. Fine, we'll take it. But anyway, the Russians have left as quickly as they came. Utterly surreal. So I checked the reports, and we have some kind of broken thread, sort of code, script, flavor event. I'm gathering at the Paris Peace Conference, which was in real life in 1856. Of course, the war started a bit earlier. That's the end of the war, and my assumption was, well, we must have lost the war because the Russians were fairly deep in our territory. That's not the case, and the more I thought about it, I thought, well, of course it's not the case. They control Plevna, but Plevna is only a location of military significance. It's not of any political significance. It's not a victory location. The only victory location they had held was Salonika, and we defeated them at Salonika. Further to that, I mean, I don't know what's triggered the peace event. I don't sort of read the code of these games or anything like that. But I didn't actually check what the Russian national morale was. It may have been the case that the defeat that they experienced at Salonika was significant in terms of the political ramifications it had for them. I mean, the Russians had, I would guess, something between 200 to 300,000 troops in the Balkan Peninsula by the end of last year. And we know that 200,000 of those were defeated at Salonika twice, really. In the first battle, of course, they had a really large force there, and it looks like their plan was to absolutely make a stand and hold Salonika. And they failed to do that against a smaller force, which is obviously well led, but it's... Omar Pasha had to march across 2 rivers, engage the Russians across a river at the end of a, 7, 8, 9 day march. They had a fortified town, twice the numbers. I'm guessing that maybe this defeat would have been really, really significant in terms of their national morale. Such an open public defeat of such a large force. In fact, the majority of the force that they had in the Balkan Peninsula. And I suppose the question would have been, if they can't defeat their kind of nemesis under these perfect conditions of, they were they were in a really strong defensive position. Most of their force we see had been there for some time. Then when are they going to defeat him? They're not going to defeat him in any kind of perfect terrain like Adrianople. They're not going to defeat him in any kind of set piece. So anyway, maybe it's a combination of a sense that they're just not really making any headway in the Balkans, plus the British and the French beginning to kind of conduct independent operations in southern Russia or in southern Ukraine, that this kind of combined really to kind of put enough pressure on them to basically fold. We don't get anything from this. We never expected that we were going to get anything from this. We don't lose anything, which is good. We don't lose any prestige. In fact, on the basis of the battles that we fought, we've gained a lot of prestige in this war. We're ranked 5th now, above Prussia, in terms of the kind of great power sort of league, if you like. In fact, the power above us is Russia. They have about 1,000 more prestige points than we. But yeah, it's funny because it really felt like the war was beginning to close in as well. It really felt like, I didn't think that we were necessarily going to be defeated, but I thought that 54 was going to be a really, really tough year, and that we would have to put out something really, really spectacular to kind of turn the tide. But I mean, the fact that it feels very difficult for one, for us, doesn't mean that the Russians knew that. I mean, there's historical precedence for this. In the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, the Japanese, despite having won all the battles, having taken Port Arthur, having sent the entire Imperial Russian fleet to the bottom of the sea, had reached the conclusion that they were kind of doomed. The Japanese thought that the kind of game was up, really. As far as they were concerned, the Russians had the kind of the Trans-Siberian Railway. They had a massive army. They would simply build a huge force up, and there's nothing the Japanese could have done beyond what they did. The Japanese economy was very kind of embryonic in terms of its industrial development at that time. They were struggling to supply and replace losses in their forces, and they were reaching this kind of point of exhaustion. And of course, the 1905 revolution broke out in Russia, and this convinced them that holding on was kind of worthwhile, and it paid off. But of course, the Russians had no idea the Japanese felt like this, and the Japanese felt that their situation was quite dire. And so, it's within the realms of historical plausibility that whilst it really was feeling increasingly difficult for us, the Russians didn't know where all of our forces were. They couldn't possibly know, what we had and where, and all they've experienced really is defeat after defeat in the field against what should have been a weaker opponent. And after the failure of the first year of the war in 52, it's clear that in 53, the last year of the war, they made a really concerted effort, and they did do well. But at the end of the year, they never managed to hold a significant objective, which is either Sofia or Salonika or Adrianople. They never managed to hold any of these locations for any serious length of time. We were always able to take them back, and in the process of taking them back, we usually gave the Russians an absolute drubbing. But anyway, the war's over, and it feels strangely anticlimactic. All of that. And of course, we get nothing. The shots are called by the French and the British, and they're not interested. It was never about us. I think if we get something, we stake a claim based on our prestige. We stake a claim on the idea that the Ottoman Empire is very much back in the game as a military power. We openly defeated an opponent which has comfortably defeated us in the previous couple of wars. Really, we defeated them many, many times in the field, and we have certainly showed that the new model army is up to the task of fighting a major power. Now, in terms of whether we could have really held our own on our own without the British or the French, the British and the French on the surface didn't do very much, but we do know that they conducted the British at least conducted some kind of independent campaign in southern Crimea, and in any case, the mere kind of presence of their forces, the mere presence of at least of their being at war with Russia, means that it's quite likely the Russians still held forces back in the Baltics around St. Petersburg and this sort of thing. I don't know if Russia is still at war with Sweden, presumably so, because this was a completely separate conflict, wasn't it? No, they made peace with Sweden as well, by the looks of it. Okay. Yeah, and they've given supply and access rights to all of the powers that were fighting them. I guess that's temporary. It allows forces to withdraw and this sort of thing. But yeah, it's hard to know how different it would have been if we were fighting alone. But we do have to look at the experience of this war and draw some really sort of heavy-duty conclusions, really. For one, in the next war, we don't want to really be dependent on the leadership qualities of one general, which, let's face it, was very much the case in this war. I think without Omar Pasha, we would have been really, really hard pressed, to kind of do as well as we did. And I think in any case, and I may be wrong here, but I get the impression that probably with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, with the development of kind of military technology, science and technique, that it may very well be the case that this may be the last period of kind of heroic warfare where we can have characters like this. Now, of course, we know that in the 20th century there were great heroic generals and this sort of thing, but it may be less and less the case that the leadership qualities of an individual general can make an impact in the way that was the case in this war. We also want to ensure that future wars are not fought deep inside our territory. To that end, one thing that we are going to be doing, I think in the next 5 years, is to to begin the construction of a colossal fortress at Constanta. It's going to be the biggest, the most modern kind of fortress. We're going to have a depot there, and we're going to start building up a really large garrison. And the purpose of that, of course, is simply just to hold out, buy us time for us to mobilize our forces, bring them into play. We want to make sure that we have 2 standing armies, at the very least, I think, in the Balkan Peninsula. Omar Pasha, I think he dies in real life in the 1870s. I don't know how that's reflected in game, and furthermore, he may very well have retired from military service many years before he died. I think in the 1850s he's not very old. He's only in his 50s. He's not a really old man. But anyway, having his service for another decade would be really, really good, of course. But yeah, I think fortifications, calcifying the frontier against Russia is going to be the order of the day. Constanta, most certainly that's the case, but also the eastern frontier. We're going to sort of upgrade and develop the fortress, expand and upgrade the fortress at Kars. We're also going to build large fortresses in Van and Batumi. And yeah, just build kind of redoubts, a system of redoubts, kind of Maginot, if you like, of the Ottoman Empire in the east. We're also going to ensure that the fortresses behind Constanta are also upgraded. Plevna, Sofia, and Thessalonica. So in the event that Constanta falls, there is a second chain of fortresses. We might also look to build a fortress in Varna. It's going to be something we're going to do over a long period of time, but it's going to be the main kind of draw, I think, on our budget for the foreseeable future. Of course, it's very likely that the next war won't be against Russia. And further to that, look, we had big friends in this war. And okay, they didn't do very much, but the next war we fight could be against Austria, very likely against Austria, possibly even against France, our former ally. But it's likely that the next war we fight against a great power, we're going to be on our own. We're going to try and do everything we can to ensure that isn't the case. Now, one thing that we do have is very high relations with Britain on the back of that war. Our relations are really at a high watermark. So we're going to try and make the most of that, and we're going to try and secure a defensive treaty. Now, yeah, this is not kind of done for a period of time. If you did declare war, yeah. So it means we have to declare war on anyone that the British are at war with, which is not too much of a problem, I don't think. But yeah, a defensive treaty, an open military alliance with the British, I think might be a good shout. So we're going to propose that we do have enough diplomats. Let's promise local support. Propose defensive treaty. And we could even use defensive treaty to develop that into something more. But we're going to go with that's 4 diplomats, so that's going to be a big effort. But we've got really good relations with them. If not now, then when, sort of thing. Promise local support requires 2 diplomats, so yeah, it'll be defensive treaty. Just realised I clicked on France. What am I doing? God. Okay, Britain. Take 2. Available treaties, yeah. Offer defensive treaty. Okay, fine. It may not come off. I mean, Britain's going to think, well, why? We're not going to fight the war against another great power. Russia's definitely no threat to you now. And Britain probably doesn't want to become embroiled in a war against Austria, so Britain might very well not be interested in this. But whilst relations are as high as they are, they might just consider this a long-term kind of prospect for them. It might serve their interests. So we'll see what we can do. But we are very much back to a world now of developing our economy. Yeah, we don't get anything. We don't get any territory. The only country that gets anything really concretely, in addition to the prestige from battles and such, is 50 prestige for France, because of course the treaty is held in Paris. This is a good bit of PR for Louis Napoleon III. But yeah, the war is gone. It's strange. It's a funny game. This. It's sort of. Wars feel like they last such a long time. Now, even if I hadn't been depicting this war on sort of YouTube, I would have probably played about the same number of turns a week as I have anyway. And it wasn't a very long war. It started in March 52, so it's just, shade under 2 years. And yet it feels like an eternity. It feels like an absolute eternity. And as I mentioned, whilst the war was happening, after a year or so, you start craving the kind of the kind of comfort and assurances of peacetime, of just focusing on economic development. Wars can be quite chaotic, I started building kind of military forces that I don't have any long-term plans for. I mean, these kind of militia sort of divisions. There's no way I want to kind of maintain these really. So I might even be looking to kind of reorganize the army at some point. We've still got state revenue. We've got very little state revenue now. I'll mention something about that in a moment. There's a reason for that. But we've still got state revenue being ploughed into percussion-capped muskets. If we really quickly check, let's just check our state revenue. Yeah, minus 50. And yeah, we're okay in terms of a kind of incoming and outgoings. We've got enough basically to pay for everything and to cover the kind of expenses of the state. The next thing we really want in terms of technology is railroads, to tell you the truth, before we developed too much more of an industrial economy. Because these factories, I mean, our factories are going to run at a lower level of efficiency anyway than a factory in Britain or France, but it's even lower on the basis that we have no serious kind of modern infrastructure. We just have roads, and of course, what we want are railroads. So that's the next kind of really important technology. It's going to take a bit of time for some of the Balkans to recover. There's kind of evidence of looting and war damage, of course, and it'll take a bit of time, maybe sort of some months for that to kind of go away. And there's a supply and production penalty in these regions because of that. And unfortunately, that includes the area around Constantinople. So there's a slight production penalty here, but that's okay. That'll kind of resolve itself in no time at all. But yeah, that's it. The war's over. I guess we kind of the Imperial fleet, I think, is back anyway. So we'll sit the Imperial fleet in Constantinople. I guess we bring the raiding fleet back. One thing I noticed actually is that the Russians had just left the Mediterranean also. So it looks like the raiding fleet kind of did its job. It didn't really sort of sink huge numbers of Russian ships, but fairly satisfied with that. We denied the Mediterranean to the Russians. Now, we do have a couple of insurgencies that have very quickly developed, so no rest for the wicked. We've got a small insurgency that's developed. Looks like a couple of units this time in Misurata. So we're going to kind of gear the infantry division that's sitting at Tripoli up for our kind of sortie. It's going to take them 11 days. This force should be more than enough, I think, to kind of deal with that insurgency. Furthermore, there's another one. I've already actually made the move. There's another kind of insurgency that's cropped up in Basra. So they're actually besieging the Colonial Fort there. And the garrison will set that force to kind of hold at all costs. Well, let's do that. Interesting. Fine. And we hope that they just hold out. I mean, it's going to take. We're going to be using riverine transport to move the Baghdad division down to Basra. It's going to take 9 days, and again, that should be, as a force, that should be more than sufficient to deal with that, I think. And that's it. So, diplomats out to Britain. No economic kind of moves this term. We're going to obviously monitor the economy a bit more closely now, and start kind of carefully monitoring our economic development as things to return to normal. This last April in 53, usually in April, I kind of collect information with regard to things like domestic consumption, exports, imports. I didn't do that because the distortions created in the economy during the war were so great by April 53 that it was just meaningless, really, in terms of providing us with any kind of accurate data for the development of the economy. But the focus now, of course, is going to be the hope in some respects, really, is that we do have a long period of peace. If Britain goes with this deal, this kind of defensive pact, that should ward the Austrians off. If not, who knows? Austria might want to make a move really quickly. I don't know. I don't think so. But, I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. Maybe they declare war in 5 years. Maybe they declare war next year. Maybe they declare war in 1860. Maybe they never do. I don't know. But that's definitely going to be on the cards. If there's one thing the Austrians will not kind of accept, that's, an Ottoman Empire that looks like it's going to kind of, we're not going to be resurrecting ourselves in terms of our territory, our sort of former kind of the territory that we formerly controlled in previous centuries, but they certainly won't like the idea of an Ottoman Empire that is any kind of threat to it. They will want to publicly display that they can defeat the Ottoman Empire. And also they have, anyway, an interest in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Sarajevo, I think, is one of their kind of victory locations, if you like. It's one of the... it's one of their objectives list, so it will be a city that they'll be looking to kind of make a move on. I'm kind of two minds about Bosnia. Part of me thinks, part of me thinks let's fortify Sarajevo as well as kind of Constanta, build a big depot there and this kind of thing. But also, Austria would be able to move on Bosnia quite easily, besiege Sarajevo with very large forces, maybe 2 or 3 armies. Austria, in some senses, is much more dangerous to us than Russia. Even though Russia is a more powerful country, Austria is more compact. It can deploy its forces. They had an army, in Prague. It can deploy that army as far south as Steinmark using sort of railroad transport and strategically redeploy it in no time at all. It can achieve force concentration better. Its army is much more professional. Its officers are more serious. You know, they're kind of more professional. Russian officers are a bit more like kind of enthusiasts, aristocrats, sort of amateurs, really. That is also the case with the Austrian army, but they do have a much more serious kind of meritocratic system. Their officers, are generally going to be much more effective. And lots of little things stack up. With a kind of more westernized army, lots of little things like they'll have balloon detachments, which they will use to kind of vector in artillery barrages. Their infantry will fire at a slightly higher rate of fire and will have slightly better weapons. And all these things stack up and serve to mitigate the leadership qualities, for example, of one man. So we have to keep that in mind, that big pitched battles against the Austrians will be a much dicier affair, I suspect, than Russia. But anyway, this might not be something that's on the cards for many years. The hope is we get a good few years now of economic development. And we will return back to the kind of the pattern, I think, of kind of quarterly reports. Delivering quarterly business reports that anyone that's following the series can kind of follow the development of the Ottoman economy, technological developments. Of course, we will continue now to refocus on the situation in Aden. I'm quite glad that we were able to stabilise the situation enough in Aden that we didn't lose it at all. We kind of kept a toehold. And one of the reasons we don't have much state revenue is one thing that I've instantly done is to begin a mass kind of program in Aden, in the actual town itself. Now, this area is the colonial capital. We want a port, really, a port that's secure. So we're building a port in Aden, or a harbour. We're building a fortress. Two kinds of fortresses we're going to be building. One is going to be a colonial fortress, which is a bit like the one we have in Hodeida, which is kind of permanently besieged at the moment. And in addition to that, we're going to be building a kind of the kind of fortress that you would see in Europe, the kind of fortress that exists at Plevna. We're going to be building a large city sort of size fortress. Of course, there is no city here, but we can still use it. We're going to be building a large kind of modern industrial fortress, and our thinking is that will provide the basis for sort of colonial exploitation. We're sending some merchants. We're building a trade post. We're sending missions to Aden. And we're going to expand outwards from Aden. We do intend to hold our position in Sana, which is the most populous part of Aden, or Yemen. But yeah, this has been quite costly. We've invested a lot here, and this cavalry division is out of supply. It might be prudent actually for us to break off the supply forces. Have a look. How long will it take? 20 days. There's no other way of doing this. We're trying to force march it. It's a 30% chance. 15 possibly. So we're going to send this supply detachment through enemy territory, through Hadramut, and this obviously is not a force that has any kind of combat value, and we're going to be linking up with this cavalry division to provide them with some supplies, hopefully just long enough for us to get this harbour set up. Anchorage is going to take 45 days, so like a month, or a shade over a month, and also we're building a depot there, and a sort of pre-industrial fortress. That fortress will gradually be upgraded, but we intend to make a stand here in Aden, and we're of course going to be looking to relieve or release a commander from the European theatre to head there and run operations. I don't know who. We'll have to think about that. For the time being, we're going to keep our forces in place. We're going to enter them into structures, just so they can get. Look at that, Omar Pasha's not activated. Well, that's fine with me. But yeah, we're going to. Clunky interface alert. There we go. Yeah, so we're going to drop our forces into fortresses just for the time being. There's nothing else we're going to do militarily, I think. We'll begin to kind of deconstruct our forces, and we can kind of relieve them of their commands now, I suppose. Yeah, we'll begin to deconstruct them, and we'll kind of obviously keep a force assembled that can be kind of readily mustered. We might actually send one of these chaps. We'll have a look. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of the Crimean War. That seminal moment for the Ottoman Empire, right at the beginning of the game, and a bit of a test run for us, really, as I say, because we have the advantage of powerful allies. We have an opportunity to kind of test our new army, and with the kind of slightly insulated, slightly cocooned, really, by their presence. And if Britain doesn't go with this defensive alliance, that'll be the only time that happens. Probably we'll be fighting a great power alone next time, maybe even multiple great powers. But we'll face that when we come to it. So early January 1854, the war is over. Peace in Paris is declared. And that'll be it from me now until March. There'll be a quarterly report. I'll pass the turns, and hopefully we'll have railroad development. Railroad development isn't something that we need to actually research. It's something that's already been developed. So it's really just something that will kind of, it'll be like a realization of its utility, really, that will happen very suddenly, one turn. Looks like Spain has it, everyone kind of has it except us. Come on. The Ottoman Empire needs this. Russia has it. You know, I mean, if we're building kind of Constantinople into this colossal kind of industrial city, it kind of flows from that we will, you know, we'll be looking to kind of develop railroads soon. So hopefully in the next year or two. But yeah, thanks for watching. First war out of the way, and it's a win, albeit an anticlimactic win, and a slightly surprise win given how the war was going, but a win nonetheless, and we'll take it. Next video, yeah, March 1854 for a quarterly business report. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the